Mr. Gül, the candidate for the AK Party, the AKP, could not have been elected in the first two rounds, but could have been easily elected on the third and fourth rounds. But then, as a very unacceptable interpretation of the Constitution, the major opposition party took the issue to the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court decided that two-thirds majority is not only the decisional majority, but the majority needed for the start of the session. I am not going to bother you with the technical details of Turkish constitutional law. Let me say, and if there are questions, I would be happy to answer, this is against the literal and historical and theological interpretations of the Constitution. At any rate, this was the first so-called judicial coup d'etat. That was followed by another two. One was the cancellation of the constitutional amendment by the Constitutional Court in 2008, popularly referred to as the headscarf amendment, because the purpose of the amendment was to lift the headscarf ban for female university students without actually mentioning the word headscarf. It would have liberalized the clothing rules for the university students, female university students. I am not going to debate the substance of the issue here. However, under our system, the Constitutional Court has no competence to review a constitutional amendment on substantive grounds. Its competence is limited very clearly by Article 148 of the Constitution to only procedural grounds, and not all procedural grounds at that, but only three specifically mentioned ones, such as whether the proposal for constitutional amendment has enough signatures, which is 1/3 of the whole membership of the House, whether it is adopted by a 2/3 majority or at least 3/5 plus a referendum, and whether it is debated twice instead of once. The Constitutional Court did not have at that time, and does not have at the moment, to review a constitutional amendment apart from these three procedural criteria. But in 2008, the Constitutional Court annulled the constitutional amendment, arguing that it was against the unamendable rules of the Constitution and allowing some female students to wear headscarf at the universities would destroy secularism. Especially for this country, it's an unbelievable argument. At any rate, it happened. The third breaking point was the closure case against the AK Party, again on grounds which is even hard to imagine in any Western country, that the party had become a focal point of anti-secular activities. Again, I am not going to answer the accusations point by point. That would take hours. But let me say that in no European country, in no Western democracy, a party can be closed down or a closure case can be brought against a party for such reasons. Therefore, I am coming to the recent package, first before the Constitutional Court, and then hopefully before the people in a referendum process. Turkey has a serious problem with its judiciary. At this point, since I'm speaking to an essentially American audience, I'll go back to the period of Roosevelt. At some point in the 30s, you know this background perfectly well, better than I do, when the Supreme Court found New Deal laws, one after another, unconstitutional. Roosevelt is reported to have said, now it is time to save the Constitution from the Supreme Court. Now we are in a similar situation. result is that the Constitutional Court has usurped the constituent power. I am not talking about legislative power, but something even above the legislative power, the constituent power, the power to make or amend the Constitution. Now, according to its interpretation, it is the sole owner, the sole possessor of the constituent power. I don't think this is a proposition acceptable in any Western democracy. So what the package proposes, again, without going into details, it aims at a restructuring of the Constitutional Court, a restructuring of the High Judicial Council, or with the full name, the High Council for Judges and Public Prosecutors. In addition to that, it proposes many changes whose democratic quality is not challenged even by the opposition, such as by the creation of an Office of Ombudsman, by strengthening the constitutional provisions on positive discrimination in favor of women, elderly, children, the handicapped people, etc. By narrowing down the area of competence of the military courts in favor of civilian courts. Again, this is a perfectly democratic proposal. However, the major opposition party, or rather 111 deputies, took the matter to the Constitutional Court, again arguing that it is against the unamendable rules of the Constitution. At the moment, the Constitutional Court is reviewing it, and we don't know what the result would be. I see it as a 50-50 case. In case the Constitutional Court repeats the earlier decision, 2008 decision, then, okay, I'm about to finish. 2 minutes?
Yes.
Oh, you are very generous.
Oh, he is very generous.
Moderator. Then, of course, the referendum will not take place. If the Constitutional Court does not annul it, then we'll have a referendum on 12 September, and the people will speak. And I believe in a democracy, the people is the ultimate power to decide on constitutional matters, to change or remake the Constitution, and that therefore we will wait for the results of the referendum. If the matter goes to a referendum, there is the possible hurdle of the Constitutional Court in between. Just one word, I'm using the 2 minutes granted to me. Interestingly, there is a parallelism between the criticism against the AK Party's foreign policy and AK Party's domestic policy. Usually those criticisms are raised by the same circles. On the one hand, it is argued that we have turned our back to the West. We are approaching the East, the Middle East. Islamist motivations are dominating the foreign policy. That is the foreign policy side of it. Domestic policy-wise, it is argued that the AK Party government is leading Turkey to an Islamist regime, gradually or not so gradually.